The hotel staff kicked out a black man who was just mopping the floors there, but none of them knew that he was the new boss of the hotel. The next day, the man returned to the hotel as the manager, and the following happened. What you will find out will shock you. Subscribe to the channel. Please support my channel. It's very important to me. Write where you are watching this video from in the comments. James Hall, a successful black businessman, had recently purchased one of the most prestigious hotels in the city. He had earned his fortune through sheer determination, hard work, and strategic investments. Owning this hotel was a dream come true, but James wasn't satisfied with simply being the owner. He wanted to understand the employees, to see how they interacted when they didn't know the man in charge was watching. His plan was bold. He would disguise himself as a janitor for a week, working among the staff, getting a first-hand look at the inner workings of his establishment. James wanted to see the true nature of his employees, especially how they treated guests, each other, and anyone they might deem beneath them. With the help of a close friend in the hotel's management, James donned a simple uniform, a plain blue shirt, black pants, and worn shoes. His usual polished appearance was hidden under a cap, and his face, often seen on business magazines, was shielded behind a pair of thick glasses. The transformation was complete, and no one would suspect the quiet, unassuming janitor was the new owner of the lavish hotel. As he walked into the hotel that morning, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies, James felt a sense of excitement. The hotel lobby, with its gleaming marble floors and opulent chandeliers, stood as a symbol of the power he had worked so hard to obtain. But today, he would experience it from a different perspective, one from the very bottom. The first day passed without much incident. James kept his head down, sweeping hallways and mopping floors, observing the interactions between staff and guests. Most people ignored him, treating him as invisible. A few guests offered polite nods, but the majority of the employees didn't even glance his way. It was exactly what he had expected, but he was determined to dig deeper. It was on the second day when things started to take a turn. He was cleaning a conference room when he overheard two employees gossiping near the entrance. One was a manager, Michael, whom James had hired just a few months ago. The other was a bellhop. "I can't believe we're getting a new owner," Michael said with a sneer. "I heard he's some hotshot businessman. But you know what I think? He's just another rich guy who'll probably screw things up." The bellhop chuckled. "Yeah, and I heard he's black. Can you imagine? A black man running this place? This hotel deserves better." James's heart sank. He hadn't expected to hear such blatant racism from his staff. He had hoped that the culture in his hotel would reflect the values of inclusion and professionalism he had built his career on. But clearly, there were deep-rooted issues. Over the next few days, he encountered more of the same. Whispers of disdain, dismissive comments about his race, and general disrespect toward lower-ranking employees, especially the janitorial staff. It became clear that while the hotel projected an image of luxury and class, behind the scenes, prejudice and discrimination lurked. By the fourth day, things escalated. While cleaning near the VIP section of the hotel, James was approached by a front desk supervisor, Linda. She looked him up and down with disdain. "You don't belong here," she snapped. "We don't need your kind lingering around the VIP guests. You're making people uncomfortable." James, maintaining his cover, nodded and moved away, but the sting of her words stayed with him. That night, as he sat in his penthouse apartment, he reflected on the week's events. His experiment had revealed an ugly truth. Many of the employees harbored deep prejudices, and the hotel, under his ownership, had a culture that needed a radical transformation. James knew what had to be done. James had seen enough. After a week of walking in the shoes of the people who worked under him, he felt both disillusioned and determined. The reality of racism and disrespect he encountered was more than just a surface issue. It was a systemic problem that ran through the hotel staff. He had to act, but before making any changes, James wanted to make one final dramatic statement. The plan had been simple enough: observe, take note, and leave quietly. But now, he decided that confrontation was the only way forward. He was ready to reveal his true identity, and with it, shake the very foundation of the hotel's culture. James wanted to show these employees that their prejudice had consequences, and that it wasn't just about who they thought he was, but about how they treated anyone who didn't fit their narrow views. Early the next morning, James arrived at the hotel once again in his janitor's uniform. Today, however, he walked with a different kind of purpose. The employees who had so easily dismissed him, those who had whispered about him, or had treated him with outright disrespect, had no idea what was coming. As he entered the hotel lobby, Linda, the front desk supervisor who had previously insulted him, was standing by the concierge, exchanging pleasantries with a well-dressed guest. The moment she saw him, her smile faded, replaced by the same look of disdain he had grown used to seeing. She approached him, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "You again," she spat. "I thought I told you to stay away from the VIP section. What are you even doing here so early?" James stood tall, his heart pounding, but he kept his composure. He was no longer the silent janitor, shrinking in the shadows. Today, he would remind everyone who he truly was. Without a word, he walked past her, heading straight for the manager's office. Linda, visibly confused, followed him, her face turning red with frustration. "Where do you think you're going? You can't just—" James swung open the door to the office. Inside, Michael, the manager who had been at the center of the gossip earlier that week, was sitting behind his desk, casually sipping coffee and going over the day's bookings. He looked up, startled by James's abrupt entrance. "What the—" Michael began, but his words caught in his throat as James removed his janitor's cap and straightened his posture, revealing the composed, commanding figure that had long been hidden beneath the disguise. The room seemed to freeze. "Mr. Hall?" Michael stammered, his coffee cup slipping from his hand and spilling onto the desk. What are you doing in that uniform?" James took a deep breath, finally ready to confront the reality that had been festering behind the hotel's polished exterior. "I've been working undercover," James said, his voice steady. "I wanted to see how my employees really treated people when they thought no one important was watching." The color drained from Michael's face, and Linda, standing behind James, looked as if she had seen a ghost. There was no more anger or arrogance in her eyes, only shock and fear. "I bought this hotel," James continued, his tone sharp but controlled. "And what I've seen over the past week is beyond disappointing. The way you treat people, the way you speak about them behind closed doors. It's not just unprofessional, it's unacceptable." Michael's hands trembled as he tried to collect himself. "Mr. Hall, I didn't know it was you. If I had known—" "That's exactly the problem," James interrupted, his voice rising with conviction. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect. Whether I'm the owner of this hotel or a janitor, or just a guest passing through, what gives you the right to treat anyone differently based on their race or their position?" Linda took a step forward, her voice shaky. "Mr. Hall, please, I didn't mean anything by it, I just thought—" "You thought what?" James turned to her, his gaze sharp. "You thought you could belittle and insult me because of my appearance? Because you didn't know who I really was?" The room was filled with a tense silence. Both Michael and Linda stood motionless, knowing they had no defense for their actions. The weight of their behavior, now fully exposed, pressed down on them. James turned his back to them and walked over to the window, looking out at the bustling city beyond the walls of the hotel. He had spent years building his business, working to create opportunities for himself and for others. He had come too far to allow this kind of ignorance and racism to tarnish his name, or the legacy he was trying to build. "You will both face the consequences of your actions," James said quietly, his back still to them. "There is no place for people like you in this hotel." Michael began to protest, his voice rising with desperation. "Please, Mr. Hall, I can change." "We can change," James turned around, cutting him off once again. "You've had your chance, Michael. You've shown me exactly who you are, and I can't trust someone like you to lead my staff. Both of you are fired, effective immediately." The color drained from their faces as the words sank in. Linda's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. They had both been so confident, so sure of their positions in the hierarchy of the hotel. Now, that confidence had crumbled. "I will be restructuring the entire staff," James continued. "I will be implementing new policies, ones that reflect the values of equality, tolerance, and respect that I expect from every employee who works under my roof. This hotel will be a place where everyone is treated with dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from." As James left the office, Michael and Linda stood frozen, their world shattered. But James felt a sense of calm as he walked through the hotel. His plan had worked, and now he would begin the real transformation. He knew that the changes he would make wouldn't just be about firing a few bad employees. It would be about building a new culture from the ground up, one where the poison of racism had no place. James stepped out of the manager's office, his heart pounding with the weight of what had just transpired. The hotel's gleaming corridors, once a symbol of success and ambition, now felt like the starting point of a new battle. He had confronted the blatant racism that had festered in his staff, but the true challenge still lay ahead, transforming the culture of this hotel into one that reflected his values of equality, respect, and justice. As he walked down the hall, the employees he passed seemed to sense something had shifted. They watched him closely, perhaps beginning to realize who he truly was and what his presence meant. James felt their eyes on him but kept his gaze forward. He had a bigger mission now, one that couldn't be accomplished with words alone. Later that day, James called an all-staff meeting in the hotel's grand ballroom. It was the same ballroom where he had once celebrated the purchase of this luxurious property, but now it would serve as the space where a transformation would begin. The staff trickled in slowly, whispering among themselves, clearly unsure of what was happening. James stood at the front, his face calm but firm, waiting for everyone to arrive. As the final employees took their seats, the room fell silent. "I'm sure most of you are wondering why I've called you here today," James began, his voice steady and commanding. "Some of you may know who I am by now. For those of you who don't, my name is James Hall. I am the new owner of this hotel." A murmur swept through the crowd as the staff exchanged glances. James let the moment sink in before continuing. "For the past week, I've been walking among you in disguise. I've seen how some of you treat people you believe are beneath you. I've heard the words spoken in whispers, the insults, the disrespect. And I'm here to tell you that it stops today." The murmurs grew louder, but James held up his hand, silencing the room. "This hotel is my investment, but it's also my responsibility, and I take that responsibility seriously. The way some of you have behaved is not only unprofessional, it's unacceptable. There will be changes. Effective immediately, every employee in this hotel will be required to attend mandatory training on cultural sensitivity and diversity. We will no longer tolerate racism or any form of discrimination within these walls." The staff sat in stunned silence. For some, the news was a wake-up call. For others, it was a direct threat to the toxic behavior they had grown accustomed to. But James wasn't finished. "I understand that some of you may feel uncomfortable with these changes, but let me be clear, This is not negotiable. If you can't accept the new policies and the new culture we are building here, you will no longer have a place in this hotel." James paused, scanning the room, his gaze lingering on a few familiar faces. He could see the discomfort in their expressions, the realization that their old ways were no longer welcome. "We will become a hotel that stands for more than just luxury. We will stand for respect, for fairness, for equality. This hotel will be a place where everyone, regardless of their background, can feel welcome and valued. And I will personally ensure that these values are upheld." The silence in the room was palpable. James knew this wouldn't be an easy transition. Some would resist, others might leave, but he was prepared for that. What mattered now was that the foundation of the hotel was being rebuilt brick by brick, on principles that reflected his vision of justice and inclusion. After the meeting, James sat in his office, going over the plans for the training sessions. He had hired one of the top diversity consultants in the country to lead the sessions, ensuring that every staff member would receive the proper education and tools to understand the importance of treating all people with respect. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. It was Emily, the head of human resources, a woman who had been with the hotel long before James had acquired it. She stepped into the office, her expression a mix of nervousness and respect. "Mr. Hall," she began, her voice hesitant, "I just wanted to say that I support the changes you're making. It's been needed for a long time, but I have to admit there's a lot of resistance among the staff. Some of them don't believe you'll follow through with this." James leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "What do you mean?" Emily hesitated, clearly weighing her words carefully. "There's been a culture here, a certain way of doing things. People get comfortable in their roles, and they don't always think about how their actions affect others. They don't believe that someone in your position will actually enforce these changes. They think this is just talk." James narrowed his eyes, feeling a wave of determination wash over him. "Then they're wrong. I'm not just talking about change, Emily. I'm going to make sure it happens." Emily nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I believe you, Mr. Hall. I'll do everything I can to help." James appreciated her support, but he knew that this wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about changing hearts and minds, about breaking down the ingrained biases and prejudices that had been allowed to fester for too long. The next few weeks were intense. The diversity training sessions began, and while some staff members embraced the opportunity to learn and grow, others pushed back. There were murmurs of discontent, rumors that certain employees were planning to leave, but James didn't waver. Every day he met with the consultant, checking on the progress of the training. He made it a point to attend some of the sessions himself, observing how the staff reacted to the new material. Some were visibly uncomfortable as they were forced to confront their own biases, while others seemed eager to improve. But it wasn't just about the training. James also worked on restructuring the management team. Michael and Linda's firings had sent a clear message, but more changes were needed. He promoted individuals who had shown compassion, integrity, and a genuine desire to contribute to the hotel's new vision. Slowly, the staff began to shift, and a new energy filled the air. One day, as James walked through the lobby, he noticed a different atmosphere. There were smiles where there had once been scowls. The staff, now more diverse than ever, interacted with guests in a way that felt genuine and welcoming. As James passed a group of housekeepers, one of the younger staff members, a new hire named Tasha, approached him. She had heard about his undercover experience and admired his dedication to change. "Mr. Hall," she said shyly, "I just wanted to say thank you. This place feels different now. Better. It's like we're all part of something important." James smiled, feeling a sense of pride well up inside him. This was what he had been working toward. a hotel that wasn't just known for its luxury but for its heart. James sat in his office, staring out of the large window that overlooked the city skyline. The tension that had been building for weeks was finally reaching its peak. He had implemented the new policies, fired those who had no place in his vision for the hotel, and started mandatory training for all staff. The message was clear. This hotel would no longer tolerate racism or prejudice, but he knew that change wasn't something everyone would accept willingly. The rumors of resistance had reached him through Emily, and while many employees were adjusting, there were still a few holdouts, staff members who resented the new direction James was taking. He had anticipated this, but now, as he prepared for the final phase of his plan, he felt the weight of the conflict about to unfold. Later that afternoon, James received a call from the front desk. "Mr. Hall, there's a group of staff members who would like to speak with you," the receptionist said, her voice tinged with unease. "They seem upset." James took a deep breath. This was it, the confrontation he had been expecting. "Send them to the conference room," he replied calmly. He headed down to the conference room, his heart steady but his mind alert. As he walked through the halls, he saw faces of employees who had embraced the changes, nodding to him in quiet support. But there were others, those whose gazes were filled with distrust, even anger. These were the people who were holding on to the old ways, unwilling to accept the shift in power dynamics that James had brought. When he arrived in the conference room, he found a group of employees already seated, their expressions hardened. At the head of the group was Robert, the head of the kitchen staff, who had been vocal in his opposition to the diversity training. Next to him was Karen, the head of housekeeping, who had made no secret of her disdain for the new policies. "Mr. Hall," Robert began, his voice laced with frustration, "we've come to talk to you about these changes you've been making. A lot of us don't agree with what's happening. We've been working here for years, and now, suddenly, we're being told we need to change the way we do everything. It's not fair." James looked at the group, reading the mixture of emotions on their faces, anger, fear, resentment. He had expected this, but the challenge now was to find a way to make them see that this wasn't just about rules or policies. It was about something much deeper. "I understand that change can be difficult," James said, his voice measured and calm, "but these changes are necessary. This hotel has a reputation to uphold, not just as a luxury destination, but as a place where every guest and every employee is treated with respect and dignity. That's non-negotiable." Karen crossed her arms, her expression defiant. "We've always treated our guests well. I don't see why we need these sensitivity training sessions. It's just corporate nonsense." James walked to the front of the room, his presence commanding but not overbearing. "This isn't about corporate policies. It's about the culture of this hotel and the way people, both employees and guests, are treated. I've seen firsthand how some of you behave when you think no one is watching, and it's not acceptable." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but his tone remained confrontational. "So what? You think you can just fire people because they don't agree with your vision? Is that how you're going to run this place? By scaring people into submission?" James held his gaze, not backing down. "I don't want to scare anyone, Robert. I want to create an environment where everyone feels safe and respected. If you can't align with that, then yes, there will be consequences. This hotel isn't just a business, it's a community. And in this community, racism, prejudice, and discrimination have no place." The room fell silent for a moment. The weight of James's words seemed to settle over the group, but the resistance was still palpable. Karen, refusing to back down, leaned forward in her chair. "And what about us? The ones who've been here for years, who've built this place up? Are we just supposed to accept that everything we've done doesn't matter anymore? James softened his tone, understanding that underneath their anger was fear. Fear of change, fear of losing control, fear of the unknown. I'm not saying that what you've done doesn't matter. I respect the work that's been put into this hotel, but the world is changing, and we have to change with it. This isn't about erasing the past, it's about building a better future for everyone. The group exchanged uncertain glances, their resolve starting to waver. James knew this was the critical moment. He had to get them to see that this transformation was about more than just rules. It was about people. Think about the guests who walk through those doors, James continued. Think about the people you interact with every day. They're not all the same. They come from different backgrounds, different cultures. How do you think they feel when they're treated like they don't belong here? Like they're less than? Robert's jaw tightened, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. We're not trying to make anyone feel that way, he said, his voice softer now. But it's happening, James replied, and it's our job to make sure that it stops. This hotel is a reflection of all of us. If we allow discrimination to continue, we're saying it's okay, and it's not. The room was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. The anger had begun to dissipate, replaced by a sense of introspection. James could see that they were starting to understand, even if they weren't fully ready to admit it yet. I'm not asking you to change overnight, James said, his tone more conciliatory now. But I am asking you to be open to this process. To understand that this isn't just about policies or training. It's about being better, better for each other, better for our guests, better for the community we serve. Karen shifted in her seat, her posture less rigid than before. And if we don't agree? She asked, her voice quieter now. James met her gaze, his expression firm but not unkind. Then you have a choice to make. This hotel is moving forward, with or without those who don't want to be part of the change. There was a long pause as the weight of James's words settled over the room. Slowly, Robert nodded, though his expression was still conflicted. I guess we'll see how it goes. James nodded in return. That's all I'm asking. Give it a chance. The group began to disperse, some leaving with lingering resentment, others with a newfound sense of consideration. As they filed out of the room, James felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. This was only the beginning of the transformation he envisioned for the hotel. There would be more challenges ahead, but he knew that the foundation was being laid for something better. Later that evening, as James walked through the hotel, he noticed subtle changes already taking place. The staff who had embraced the new policies were interacting with guests in a way that felt more genuine, more welcoming. And though there were still holdouts, the atmosphere was shifting. Slowly but surely, the toxic culture that had once permeated the hotel was being replaced with one of respect and inclusion. As he made his way to the lobby, he spotted Emily at the front desk, talking to a guest. She glanced up and smiled when she saw him, giving him a small nod of approval. James returned the gesture, feeling a sense of pride in the progress they had made. But the work was far from over. James knew that true change would take time and constant vigilance. There would be more confrontations, more resistance, but he was ready for it. He had come too far to turn back now. Standing in the center of the lobby, James looked around at the hotel he had fought so hard to transform. It wasn't just about luxury anymore. It was about something much more important: justice, equality, and the power of change. As the doors to the hotel swung open and new guests walked in, James smiled to himself. This was just the beginning. This is the end of our amazing story. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Please help me get 1,000 subscribers. Also, check out our other videos.